So this is the next episode of my Chicago history series. If you haven't seen any of the previous episodes, I got those in a playlist on the channel. I've done about 12, 13 episodes before this, and right now we're going in chronological order. We are in the beginning of the 1900s. And this topic that I'm going to talk about in this video is something that really has not gotten as much exposure in popular culture or in movies or in books. This person that I'm going to talk about, Gunnis, was probably the most notorious person in maybe the history of the entire country, if not the city of Chicago, man. And, you know, she's relatively unknown. Now, she lived a long time ago, but so did Al Capone. So, you know, it's a mystery, man. But anyways, this woman was a Norwegian immigrant that was born in 1859 in Selbu, Norway. Okay, now at that time, you know, it was in a very impoverished area, or what we would consider poverty today. Rural settings, you know, living on a farm-like type setting. You know, some people consider that poor, some people consider that the life. But, you know, she was born in that type of a situation, okay, way up in the north of Europe, in those Viking countries, you know. So we gotta set the scene a little bit here, okay. At this time, Chicago is a city of European immigrants, right? Black folks have not yet come up from the South. Hispanics have not yet started settling in Chicago. It's mainly a European immigrant city. And like I've mentioned in previous videos, every European immigrant community in the city had kind of their own little niche where they spoke their own languages. They had their own, you know, communications, their own media, you know, what was media back then, which were in their languages, okay? This is what gave, for example, the Irish an advantage politically, because they spoke English natively, you know what I'm saying? Also Gaelic, but, you know, all of them were fluent in English. That gave them an advantage over other European immigrant groups because, you know, everything was in, you know, everybody's own language. So these people that you see today who are always jumping on other people for speaking Spanish or speaking other languages and, you know, saying that they need to speak English in the U.S., this is how, you know, European immigrants were as well when they first came over. So anyways, as a side note, she's born in 1859 in rural Norway, and at the age of 18, there's an unconfirmed story. She had led a normal life up to that point, you know, nice girl, whatever. But at 18 years of age, she was pregnant, okay? Now, she went to some type of a country dance. Again, this story is unconfirmed, but it's kind of widely circulated. At this country dance, she was pregnant, and she apparently was kicked in the stomach by a man at this country dance. I don't know if they had some type of altercation or what it was, but she was kicked in the stomach and she lost the baby. After that, her acquaintances said that her personality changed drastically. She became like a totally different person. Again, this is unconfirmed, but the guy who allegedly did that to her later died of symptoms, which you're going to see after she came to Chicago, a lot of her other victims were dying of. Okay, so whether or not she killed the guy who did that to her or not, we don't know. But so when she was a young woman, about like her late teens, early 20s, she comes to the United States and she settles eventually in Chicago. Okay, now she marries a guy named Mads Sorensen, another Norwegian guy, and you're going to see over the course of her life and over the course of her criminal career, she kept all of her activities amongst other Norwegian immigrants, okay? And, you know, you're going to see, like, later on in the video, when you see some of the stuff that she did, you're going to, you know, people wonder, like, how was she able to get away with this stuff? You know, in immigrant communities, people always kind of, like, keep things amongst themselves. They don't really go to the cops. You know, especially back then, it was very easy for stuff that was going on in these European immigrant circles to kind of go under the radar of the government, because if you're not part of that circle or you're not part of that environment, you don't really have access to information about what's going on there. But so she marries this guy, okay, and they have 4 kids. They opened up a candy shop in Chicago, and they also bought a home. The candy shop and the home burned down, okay, and they collected the insurance money from this. So they bought a new home with the insurance money. Now, 2 of their children, like I said, they had 4 children, they died as infants from something called acute colitis. Okay, now the symptoms of acute colitis are symptoms that can also be symptoms of poisoning, namely nausea, fever, diarrhea, abdominal pain, cramping. So they died of these symptoms. So, the cause of death was ruled, whatever, this abdominal disease, but really poisoning can also do this. Now, bear in mind, the forensics back then are not great. Okay, so nothing happens after this. She's not arrested for this. They collected life insurance policies, however, on the kids. So they got money for these kids. They had taken out life insurance policies on their young kids. Or at least she did. Okay, now they also adopted another girl who was 10 years old in 1900. Now, her husband also had life insurance policies taken out on him. In fact, he had 2 life insurance policies. And there was one particular day when the life insurance policies were going to overlap. One was going to end and the next one was going to begin. Okay, so on this particular day, if he died, Gunnis stood to collect the money on both of the insurance policies. Well, he died on that day. And the symptoms were very interesting. So one doctor saw him, and the doctor believed that he had suffered from poisoning, from something called strychnine. Okay, however, the family doctor of her husband ruled that he had been killed by a heart failure or some type of cardiac condition. So why his family's doctor ruled that, who knows? But the autopsy was never done because the death was not thought to be suspicious. Now, bear in mind, she had already lost her 2 infant kids to, the symptoms of poisoning. The husband now dies of the symptoms of poisoning. Nothing is done in either of these cases, right? So the husband's family, though, they weren't so convinced, okay, and they were kind of suspicious about what was going on here. So they wanted an inquiry. They wanted her investigated. But she collected the insurance money and took off to Indiana. She left Chicago after this. So she got away, and, it was never pursued after that. So she bought a farm, okay, and this was over by LaPorte, Indiana, and the carriage houses of the farm and a boat that came along with, that was like over there with the property, they burned down shortly after she bought it. So more suspicious activity. Still nothing was done, okay? Now, while she was preparing for the move, she got to know a guy named Peter Gunnis, another Norwegian immigrant. So this guy worked as a butcher, and she married him over in Indiana in 1902. Now, he had an infant daughter, okay, by another marriage or another woman or whatever. Belle became her stepmother. After the marriage ceremony, his infant daughter, died, okay? And this happened when the daughter was alone in the house with Belle Gunnis. The husband was not around, okay? So now she's lost her 2 kids, okay, that were hers, her husband. Now this new daughter that she had, okay, she dies. So now we're up to 4, okay, at least that we know. Maybe the guy back in Norway too, maybe 5 bodies. Then, also the same year, her husband that she had just married died when a sausage grinding machine toppled off of a high shelf in the kitchen and struck him on the head. Now, this is the story that she told. Okay, that's what she said happened. He said that, this thing had just fallen off of the shelf, hit him in the head, and he had died. So now we're up to 6 bodies. Okay, this is her husband. Okay, Peter Gunnis. He's dead now. Same year. So the coroner came over and checked the body out, and he reportedly said, quote, "This is a case of murder." So check this out. Now, remember I said she had that daughter, that 10-year-old daughter? Now, her name was Jenny Olson. Okay, the daughter that was adopted. So that daughter allegedly had told one of her classmates at school what really happened, which was that Belle Gunnis had hit her husband over the head with a meat cleaver and killed him. So there was an investigation, but apparently she weaseled her way out of it. She was able to talk her way out of them pursuing any charges against her. Now bear in mind, she's up to 6 bodies now, okay? Her brother-in-law, the brother of the deceased, he took one of the other kids that guy had up to Wisconsin and that kid ended up surviving, and that's the only child to ever survived that had lived with Belle Gunness in their life, okay? So from her husband's death, she got more insurance money, okay? And she got what was the equivalent of about $81,000 in today's money. Back then it was $3,000. So in 1903, she gave birth to another son that she had been pregnant with by that guy, Peter Gunnis. Now he was living with her, but that other daughter, the one that I had told you about, the adopted daughter who had told the classmate about what had really happened, Belle Gunness in 1906 told a bunch of the people that lived around her that she had gone away to a Lutheran college out in California. Well, later on, many years later, that girl's body was actually found buried on her property. So in 1907, she hired somebody to help her out around the farm. This was a guy named Ray Lampier. Now, he used to brag that he was sleeping with her. And this was kind of, here's the thing about Belle Gunness. She was huge for a woman. She was 200 pounds. I mean, she was a big woman, okay, and strong, like powerful. Like she was strength-wise like the equivalent probably of a man back then because of what she was doing to some of these guys, okay. But at any rate, so she's, sleeping with this guy allegedly, according to him, around the farm. But she starts to actually like try to find another guy. Like she starts to go and look for new suitors. And the way that she does this is that she goes to a Norwegian language newspaper. Okay, now again, this is important to know because, the law enforcement and everything, are they really checking like these immigrant newspapers? Like, every immigrant group like in Chicago pretty much still even today has their own language newspapers. And I mean, if there was something in there, like I doubt like anybody would ever see it like that was associated with law enforcement, man. But because it's like really underground type stuff. So she puts a personal ad in one of these papers, and translated from her language, this is what it said. She said, "Comely widow who owns a large farm in one of the finest districts in LaPorte County, Indiana, desires to make the acquaintance of a gentleman equally well provided with view of joining fortunes. No replies by letter considered unless sender is willing to follow answer with a personal visit." And then she ends the ad by saying, "Triflers need not apply." So, guys actually started responding to this, okay? And these were like middle-aged guys with money. So she would go around the town with these guys, she would doll herself up, like do her hair or dress up nice or whatever. So one of the first guys to show up was a guy named John Moe, okay? He was from Minnesota. Now he brought with him $1,000 to help pay off her mortgage. Now you might say, by the way, this is a lesson to a lot of guys. If you're thinking like, man, how could these guys, get finessed this easily? Like they're just showing up with money for this lady. Bro, look at some of the stuff that's going on around Chicago today. I mean, like I said, man, it never surprises me what some dudes are willing to do. You know what I'm saying? Like for some of these ladies, man, and it ends up getting them killed today too. You know what I'm saying? But check it out. So he shows up with $1,000. Now you gotta remember, back then that's a lot of money, okay, to pay off her mortgage. And she was going around like introducing him though as her cousin. So he was there for less than a week at her farm, and then he disappeared. Okay, now the next guy to come was a guy named George Anderson. He was from Missouri. He also said that he would pay off her mortgage, but he said that he would only pay off the mortgage if they decided to get married. So when he came, he slept, at her place. He was sleeping in the guest room. He woke up in the middle of the night, and Belle Gunness was standing over him. And according to the accounts, she was, quote, peering into his eyes, holding a candle in her hand. He stated later on that the expression on her face was so sinister and murderous that he let out a loud yell, and she immediately ran from the room without uttering a word. He was convinced that she was going to kill him, and he got out of bed as fast as he could. He put his clothes on, and he ran out of the house. He caught the first train back to Missouri, and he never came back. He left all the stuff that he had brought with him at the place. Okay, didn't even go back for his stuff. He never talked to Belle Gunness again. He didn't apparently report this. Okay, so he just, I mean, there was really nothing to report. I mean, what could he really tell the cops? Like, she was just looking at me. But he was convinced that she was going to whack him. So he took off, just ran from the place. Now, after that, more suitors came. But that guy that I just told you about, that guy Anderson, he was the only suitor to ever make it off of her property alive. Okay, every other suitor that came to check her out never left. They were whacked. Okay, the shutters on her house were closed all the time. Okay, and she rarely associated with other people. She mainly kept to herself. And she started to have trunks delivered to the place, like big trunks. One of the other guys who came to try to be a suitor was this guy named Ole Budsberg. And so the last time that he was ever seen by anybody alive was on April 6, 1907. He mortgaged his Wisconsin land, okay, that he owned. He signed over a deed, and he got several $1,000s in cash. And he went to, visit Belle Gunnis. He had some sons who, didn't know where he was going. They eventually found out, though, that he had gone to visit Belle Gunnis, and they wrote to her. She wrote back to them saying that the father had never showed up, saying that she had never seen him. Now, in December 1907, the guy who eventually was going to become kind of like the big case to start breaking all this open, he corresponded with Belle Gunnis. And this guy was a guy named Andrew Helgelian. Okay, now he was from South Dakota, and he wrote back to her. They were writing to each other. They were back and forth with the letters. This was, how it went back then. This was like the equivalent of social media today. This was like hopping in the DMs, right? So she wrote back to him in 1908, and this was the letter that she wrote to him. I'm going to quote here, and this was probably in the Norwegian language, but this is the translation at least. She said, "To the dearest friend in the world. No woman in the world is happier than I am. I know that you are now to come to me and be my own." See, here comes the finesse. "I can tell from your letters that you are the man I want. It does not take one long to tell when to like a person. And you I like better than anyone in the world I know. Think how we will enjoy each other's company. You, the sweetest man in the whole world. We will be all alone with each other. Can you conceive of anything nicer? I think of you constantly. When I hear your name mentioned, and this is when one of the dear children speaks of you, or I hear myself humming it with the words of an old love song, it is beautiful music to my ears. My heart beats in wild rapture for you. My Andrew, I love you. Come prepared to stay forever." Man, that right there should have been the tip-off, but this letter got him out there. He went there in 1908. He had with him a check for $2,900. Okay, now that was his savings. He took it all out of the bank, and he was there for a few days. So after a few days of being there, he was seen with Belle Gunnis at the Savings Bank in LaPorte, Indiana. They deposited his check. Okay, now, right around this particular point, she started to have some issues with this guy, Ray Lampier. Okay, now remember, she's, checking out all these other guys or whatever. Now she's whacking them, right, for their money. And things are starting to kind of go foul with this. He apparently really wanted her. Okay, he really had feelings for her, and he was doing all type of stuff for her, and he apparently was jealous of the guys who were coming to court her. Okay, and so he had put up with it until this guy Andrew Helgelian. When this guy showed up, he really started throwing a fit. So Belle Gunnis had to fire him. Okay, now bear in mind, he knows all her dirty little secrets. Okay, she had to fire him, and this was in February of 1908, apparently on February 3rd. Okay, so a few days after that, Belle Gunnis showed up to the bank again and deposited $1,200. Now, again, this is big-time money back then. So after she fired Ray Lampier, she went over to the LaPorte, Indiana courthouse, and she said that her former employee, Ray Lampier, was, quote, not in his right mind and was a menace to the public. So she actually was able to finesse the local, the cops or whoever it was, the local authorities back then, to hold a, quote, sanity hearing. So they had this sanity hearing about Ray Lampier, and they concluded that he was sane and not crazy. Okay, so a few days later after that, she went back there and complained to the sheriff. She said that Ray Lampier had come to her farm and had had an argument with her. And she said that he was a threat to her family, and she wanted him arrested for trespassing. Well, he was arrested, but even after that, Ray Lampier came back again. She chased him off. Okay, she didn't kill him, she chased him off. He told one of her neighbors, okay, who was also a farmer, he said, quote, "Helgelian won't bother me no more. We fixed him for keeps." So basically he was snitching. Okay. Now, I don't know whether that farmer, figured out what that meant, but he basically told that farmer, or gave him a hint at least, that they had whacked this guy too. Okay. Now, at this point, I mean, she's really getting up there in body counts, right? The problem was, though, and like I said, this was the case that broke it open. This guy had a brother named Osley, okay? And he was very, like, something was funny here, okay? So when he didn't come back, he wrote to Belle Gunness and, wanted an explanation, like, where is his brother? She wrote back to him, and she said that her brother wasn't at her farm, and she said he probably went back to Norway to visit the family. Well, he didn't buy it, okay? He did not believe that his brother would do something like that. And so Belle Gunness responded back to him again, and she said if you want to come and look for your brother, she would help him look for him. But she said that if she was involved, he would have to pay her for helping him to look for him. So these are all money finesses, bro. So she went to a lawyer in LaPorte, Indiana, and this was a guy by the last name of Leliter, and she told him that she was afraid for her life and for her children's lives because of Ray Lampier. So she told him that he had threatened to kill her and burn her house down, and she wanted to make out a will, okay, and she wanted to make out this will in case Ray Lampier actually did this stuff. So in the will, she left her estate to the children, but she never actually told the cops about Ray Lampier's statements. She just went to this lawyer. She never went to the police, okay? So in February of 1908 as well, she hired another guy, and this guy's name was Joe Maxson. This was a guy who was basically meant to replace Ray Lampier on the farm as a helper. So he was there for a couple of months, and after a couple of months, he woke up on April 28th in the early morning hours, and he smelled smoke in his room. Now, his room was on the second floor of Belle Gunness's house. He opened up the door that led to the hallway. The house was on fire, okay? So he slammed the door again. He was in his underwear. He jumped out of the second-story window. He just, barely made it out alive. He actually survived jumping out of the window. He ran all the way into town. He got a bunch of dudes to come help him. They ran back to the house, but by the time they got back, the house had already burned down. Okay, now bear in mind, she had gone to the lawyer to set all this up, like money-wise before this, telling the lawyer that Ray Lampier was the one who had, threatened to do this, but she never told the police about it, just the lawyer. Okay, so they came back to the house, right? The house is in ruins. Everything's burned down. Inside the house, they found 4 bodies, okay? One was the body of a woman. There was also the body of 3 children. Okay, now here's the suspicious thing, though, about the body of the woman. There was no head on the body. Okay, now you're going to see what's going on here. So there was a sheriff on scene, okay, by the name of Albert Smutzer. He was the county sheriff. And through the grapevine, I guess, he had heard about Ray Lampier's threats. Okay, I don't know exactly how he heard about it, but, she didn't tell the police, but he had somehow found out about it anyway. Ray Lampier was brought in. He told them that he had nothing to do with it, and he was not anywhere near the farm when the fire broke out. So one of the boys from the neighborhood said that he had seen Ray Lampier running down the road from Belle Gunness's house right before the house burned down. Okay, so he was arrested and he was charged with murder, and so he kept on saying that he's innocent, he didn't do anything. But nobody was listening to him. Okay, now remember, Belle Gunness had set all this up before this happened. The investigators, they were buying the story that the bodies were those of Belle Gunness and her 3 kids. Okay, now one of the kids was named Myrtle, age 11. There was Lucy, who was 9 years old, and then there was a kid named Philip, who was 5 years old. Now here was the suspicious thing, though. The body of the woman that had no head on it was the body of a woman who was about 5'3". Belle Gunness was way bigger than that. Okay. The body of the woman that they found also weighed about 125 pounds, and Belle Gunness weighed about 200 pounds. So the neighbors, they saw the corpse, okay, of the woman who allegedly was Belle Gunness, And they said that there was no way that that body was the body of Gunnis. Okay, so the local dentist came, and he said, sometimes they identify the bodies by the dental work or whatever, and he said that he might be able to help out. So the investigators, they were checking all through the debris, through everything that was burned down, and they found a piece of bridge work, okay, in the debris. The dentist identified it as work that had been done for Gunnis. So after that, the coroner, who was a guy named Charles Mack, he reached the conclusion that the female's body was the body of Gunnis, even though the neighbors said that it couldn't have been her, even though the weight was totally different, the height was totally different. Simply because of this piece of dental bridge work that they found, they said that it was her body. So all this investigation is going on, right? While all this is going on, the brother of that guy, Andrew Helgelian, this guy Osley, he comes to LaPorte, Indiana from South Dakota. He tells the sheriff that he thinks that his brother was murdered by Gunnis. That's his theory. Okay, now he said that he tells him all about the fact that Andrew had basically responded to this ad that Gunnis had put in the paper, and so he said that in her reply, she had offered love and marriage and all that, and that she mentioned a quick $1,000 that she had needed to pay off her mortgage. So he said that when his brother had left home, he took his life savings out of the bank, and he said that after that he was never heard from again. Now, as they were digging through the debris of Gunnis's burned down home, they found, and they were doing this to find her head, they found 8 men's watches, they found bones of other people, and they found a bunch of other human teeth. So he was looking through the property on his own, like kind of doing his own investigation. So he told the guys that were investigating the scene to start digging in a hole that was kind of like a garbage hole that was over by Gunnis's hog pen. So they began to dig over in that area. In that area, they found 4 bodies. Okay, these bodies had been sliced apart and they had been wrapped in oilcloth. One of the bodies was Osley Helgelian's brother, Andrew Helgelian, and all of his suspicions came true. Okay, so that farmhand that Gunnis had hired to help her on the farm after she had fired Ray Lampier, this guy Joe Maxson, he came out with the info that, and he was telling this to the sheriff, by the way, he said that Gunnis had told him to bring loads of dirt by wheelbarrow to an area that was surrounded by a wire fence where the hogs were fed. He said that there were, quote, many deep impressions in the ground that had been covered by dirt. These filled in holes, okay, and this was according to what Gunnis had told him. She had told him that they had contained like just garbage, okay, and or like crap from the hogs or whatever. And she said that she wanted the ground made flat. So he was filling in all of these like little indentations in the ground, but at that same time, multiple farmers that had been like traveling past her farm that night said that they had seen with their own 2 eyes Gunnis digging with a shovel over by the hog pen. So the sheriff, he took 12 guys, he went back to the farm, and this was on May 3rd, 1908. They started to dig, and they found the body of Jenny Olson, Gunnis's stepdaughter. This was the girl that had vanished all the way back in 1906, I'm sorry. And they also found the bodies of her 2 other kids. Okay, so they kept on investigating, they kept on digging and digging and digging, and they found one gruesome, like, nasty discovery after the next, body after body. Okay, so these were all the bodies that they identified. They found that guy, Old B. Budsberg from Wisconsin. He had vanished in 1907. They found a guy named Thomas Linbo. He was from Chicago. He had gone to work basically as an employee on her farm. They found a guy named Henry Gerholt. He was from Wisconsin, and he was going to be one of the suitors. He had brought $1,500, and he'd also brought a watch. Okay, and they also found the body of a guy named Olaf Svenherud. I can't pronounce these Norwegian names, man. Svenherud, I think is how you say his name. He was from Chicago. They found his body. They found that guy John Moe from Minnesota. They found a guy named Olaf Lindblom. He was 35 years old. He was also from Wisconsin. They found a guy named Benjamin Carling from Chicago. Now, he had been with a wife, okay, and this was in 1907. He had said that he was going over to Indiana to secure an investment with a rich widow. He had $1,000 with him. Okay, this was money that he had taken from an insurance company and had borrowed it, and also from several other investors. So in 1908, in June, the wife that he had left behind to go, over to Gunnis's place, she identified his remains, and this was over by the LaPorte Cemetery. And she said that, she was able to tell by the contour of his skull and 3 missing teeth that he had. So after this discovery was made, this broke the news, finally. It finally got into the regular mainstream national news, not just like the Norwegian immigrant underground news, but, now this was making national headlines. And other people who, guys had gone to see Gunnis, they all started reporting their missing brothers, their missing cousins, their missing uncles and everything, talking about they had gone over there. And so more and more stories came. So some of her additional victims, a guy named Christy Hilkman from Wisconsin, he had sold his entire farm and came to LaPorte, Indiana in 1906. A guy named Charles Neiburg, he was 28 years old. He was another Scandinavian immigrant. He was from Philadelphia. He had told his friends that he was going to go visit this Gunnis lady in June of 1906. He never came back. And he had been working in a saloon, and he took only about $500 with him, but still back then that was a lot of money. There was a guy named John Mcjunkin from Pittsburgh. He left his wife, to go get whacked by Gunnis, and this was in 1906. A guy named Olaf Jensen, another Norwegian immigrant, he was from Indiana, and he said he was going to marry a wealthy widow, and, he never returned. There was a guy named Bert Chase from Indiana. He had owned a butcher shop. He sold that, and he told his friends that he was going to marry a wealthy widow. And so his brother got a telegram, which was from Aberdeen, South Dakota, claiming that he had been killed in a train wreck. But that was all, allegedly wrong, because it was really because Gunnis had whacked him. So his brother actually did his own little investigation, and he found out that the telegram was fake. So another guy named George Bradley, Tuscola, Illinois, and he went over to LaPorte to meet a widow and her 3 kids in October 1907. There was a guy named T.J. Tiefland of Minnesota. So, you see all these bodies that she's... bro. A guy named T.J. Tiefland of Minnesota, he went to her place in 1907. A guy named Frank Riedinger. Sorry, these names, man. These are hard to pronounce. He was another farmer. He was from Waukesha, Wisconsin. He said that he was going over there to get married. He never came back. A guy named Emil Tell. He was another Swedish guy. He was from Kansas City. A guy named Lee Porter from Oklahoma. He separated from his wife. He was going to marry a wealthy widow. Same old story, never came back. John E. Hunter from Pennsylvania. So that sounds like an American guy. But he told his daughters that he was going to marry a wealthy widow. Same story. Never came back. A guy named Abraham Phillips. He was a guy who worked on the railroad in Burlington, West Virginia. In 1907, he was going to northern Indiana to marry a rich widow, and a railway watch was found in the debris of Gunnis's house. So there's several other victims that are unconfirmed bodies that she had. One of the daughters of a woman named Ms. Witzer. So this girl had apparently attended Valparaiso University. I don't know what exactly the circumstances were, why they think that Gunnis may have done that, but anyways, there was another unknown guy and a woman. They disappeared in the fall of 1906, and they disappeared on the same night that Gunnis's daughter Jenny Olson went missing. So Gunnis had said that they were a, quote, professor from Los Angeles and his wife who had taken Jenny to California. So she told, whoever that they had gone out to California with her daughter. Well, the daughter was found killed by her. Those 2 people, they were never seen again. So those are unconfirmed bodies that she might have. There's another guy who they think Gunnis might have whacked. He was the brother of a guy named Jenny Graham. And his story was the same, going to marry a rich widow in Indiana, but vanished. And there was also a guy who was just a hired guy from Ohio. He was 50 years old, and they said that he disappeared, and Gunnis somehow became the heir to his horse and buggy. And then there was another guy whose name is not known. He was from Montana. He had told people at a resort that he was going to give Belle Gunness his horse and his buggy, or at least sell it to her. And that horse and that buggy were found with several of the other horses and buggies that she had at the farm. Like, we're talking significant double-digit bodies. I mean, the list just keeps on going, man. So a lot of this is not confirmed, though, because, again, the forensics back then was very crude, the communications and everything. So, a lot of people were just disappearing, and nobody knows if it was her that did it or not. But, man, she was just, like, terrorizing that community. And like they said, a lot of the remains on the property that they found could not be identified. So, it couldn't be verified who they were, in a definitive, like, death declaration placed on it. But, so they found 14 people on her farm. They also found a bunch of teeth. They found bones. They found a bunch of watches. That guy, Ray Lampier, that she had hired, he was still alive. Now, remember, he knows a lot of the stuff that she was doing. So he was on trial for murder, and he was on trial for arson. He pled not guilty. The case depended on one very significant fact. If the body that they found was Belle Gunness's body, he was basically going to be found guilty. And if the body was not Belle Gunness's body, he was going to be found not guilty. Okay, so his lawyer was a guy named Wirt Worden. So he said that the bridge work that was found at the place was planted there by Belle Gunness on purpose. So it didn't matter. They lost the case. Ray Lampier was found guilty of arson, but he was acquitted of the murder. So he actually beat, one of the cases, but lost the other one. So in 1908, he was sentenced to 2 to 21 years in Michigan City, Indiana, to the state prison over there. And he died there in 1909 of tuberculosis. So after that, she became the equivalent of a millionaire by doing this. Multi-millionaire. They think that she had gotten about $7 million in today's money. So the investigators, they looked at all her bank accounts, and they found that there was a little bit remaining in her savings account, but the money in all the other accounts had been totally withdrawn before the fire. So she set this whole thing up, plotted it all out, had everything ready, took out all the money, and she got away clean. Okay, so Belle Gunness allegedly was seen in other parts of the country after this. Now you say, why wasn't she busted back then? You gotta remember, man, it's the early part of the 20th century. You know what I'm saying? Things were a lot easier to get away with back then, man. You had guys doing stuff back then that it would be very, very difficult to get away with today. But she was spotted around the country. Okay, she allegedly was seen alive in a town in Mississippi where she apparently owned a ton of property, and she was living like kind of like the life of like a respected person over there. Okay, so this was a report that came out in 1931. They said that she possibly was going by the name Esther Carlson. Okay, she was arrested out in Los Angeles for allegedly poisoning a guy named August Lindstrom, who was another Norwegian guy. Okay, this was in 1931, and she allegedly had poisoned him for his money. So she was doing the same crap out there, right? So two other people that had known Belle Gunness, okay, before, like, by her former identity, they said that they recognized her from photographs, okay, and they said that this was the same girl, this was the same woman who was doing all this stuff, and she was going out there and murdering more people out there, possibly adding more people to her body count, but apparently they never, like, verified this identification. I mean, you just read all this stuff that they were doing back then, and it's like, the whole thing could have been stopped, but, crude methods back then, man, they never ID'd her. So, okay, by her new identity, she died on May 6, 1931, and she died while she was awaiting trial for that murder. Okay, so she was possibly going to get busted for that finally, but she died before the trial could happen. So this is the crazy thing. That woman that, whose headless body they had found on her property, that she had basically, it was just there. That woman's body was never identified. They never found out who that was. And so they just treated it like it was hers, and they buried that body next to her husband, just like it was hers, but it wasn't hers. And her body is buried, or that woman's body, not Belle Gunness's actual body, but that body is buried in Forest Home Cemetery in Forest Park, Illinois. And that's the place where I was staying over the summer when I was in Little Village a lot, man. I was going down there, but that's like a suburb like off to the west side of Chicago, man, just beyond the border. And so Belle Gunness had a sister, and her sister has a bunch of descendants. So they actually took the headless body out of the grave. This was a team of forensic anthropologists and a bunch of grad students from the University of Indianapolis, and they wanted to find out that woman's true identity. So they had a sealed envelope flap, and there was some DNA that they got off of this apparently, and they thought that this might contain enough DNA to be compared with that of the body, but there was not. So that remains a mystery until this day. So her final body count was never determined, but it's high. She's one of the most prolific serial killers in American history, and possibly the most prolific here in Chicago. Now, again, because she was never actually tried and convicted of this stuff, the final number could never be determined. And even if she had, I mean, back then, with what they had back then, you know, who knows if they would have been able to actually put an exact number on it, but unless she had confessed. But, you know, most of these murders were done for money. And that money, man, that money leads people to do a whole bunch of evil stuff. I mean, you think about some of the stuff that money's made people do. I mean, from slavery to genocide to prostitution, like all this type of stuff, man, like it just turns humans completely depraved, but or to get away for other murders. You know, she was doing some of these murders, man, whacking her own kids, you know, whacking her husband. I mean, it was just brutal, man. So, you know, when I use the word savage to refer to this story, I mean, we're not talking about this as a compliment. I mean, it's just very, very ugly and nasty. And I'm surprised that this story is not more well known. You know, John Wayne Gacy, some of these other guys, they're much more famous. But this one, for some reason, is just kind of flown under the radar. And you can visit all these actual locations. You come to Chicago, you come to LaPorte, Indiana. You can see the place, or I mean, for people back in Europe, you can see it in Norway, you know, where she was born. But, you know, this is the place where all this stuff real life went down, man. A lot of murder stories here, obviously, in this city. But this is probably one of the first and one of the worst. Handle money with caution, man. Handle money with much caution. Money is a spiritual poison. You know what I'm saying? If you can definitely get addicted to it, and it can definitely drive you to do some of the stuff that, you know, drug addicts do when they need that high. I mean, money is a high of its own. If you're staying paid, you better stay prayed, because I'm telling you, man, you're going to need that protection, because it will definitely grip your mind. You know what I'm saying? Take over the way that you think and make you a totally different person. How many people do you know have changed because they got money? That's exactly what I mean. You know, they're no longer the person you remember them as, you grew up with, whatever. They get that money, they become a totally different person, and it's always worse. It's always worse. I don't know anybody who's gotten money and then become someone better. You know what I'm saying? This is why a lot of the guys, like a lot of the saints back in the day, they would give up money. You know what I'm saying? Like, just get rid of it. You know, because they just didn't, that weight on their soul, it was like, you know, it was weighing them down, man. So it's a tricky thing. This is your boy Winnie City Report. I'm out.